Thank you very much, ma'am. With your permission, I would, and paucity of time, I think I'll be discussing the abstracts. I'll be combining a few abstracts. So, since we have a few abstracts on endometrial cancer, so we'll be combining POTEC, the role of the role of radiation in serous cancers, modern versus old, and also about regional control in endometrial cancer in the upfront setting. So, my I think we've been really flooded with level one evidence in the last 1.5 years, and we've got strengthened evidence and more clarity now to the role of radiation, to the dose and the particular indications. My first question would be to Dr. Sajal, who is here with me on the panel. Is Dr. Sajal there?
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Bhavna.
Hello. Dr. Sajal, I would just, based on the POTEC 3, I want to know what is the local practice? Because I think we need to discuss these abstract in relation to us and how it affects our clinical practice at this point, right? So, how are you treating your patients of high risk stage 1, stage 2 endometrial cancer? Are you following the POTEC 3 module? Have you based your practice changed on the evidence in regards to the same?
Yeah, right question. Since last couple of years, lot of things are being happening in the field of carcinoma endometrium. If we see, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So initially, when the POTEC 3 came, and we thought chemotherapy has some role to play even in stage 1, stage 2 with high risk features. But now, once we have the update, so stage 1, stage 2 endometrial cancers, well differentiated endometrial carcinomas, we are treating with radiotherapy alone. And in stage 3 endometrial cancers or serous or clear cell variety, irrespective of stage, we definitely follow POTEC 3 trial protocol. One variation we do in our department, and I would like to have your comments as well as other experts' comments. POTEC 3 does adjuvant chemo radiation first. And what we have seen, probably stage 3 endometrial cancers are more of us having a systemic relapses. So probably giving adjuvant chemotherapy first, that is 4 cycles of chemotherapy and followed by chemo radiation. Probably the compliance of patients as far as chemotherapy is concerned is better. And as you have seen, even in POTEC 3, as low as 70% patients are only able to complete the adjuvant chemotherapy if we give chemo radiation first. So probably in stage 3 endometrial cancers, when we are following POTEC 3 protocol, we tend to give adjuvant chemotherapy first, unless and until there is some high risk feature like margin positivity and etc., which warrants radiation to be given first. So, but usually we give adjuvant chemotherapy first, followed by chemo radiation.
Yeah. So I think in this regard, maybe we can take the opinion of Dr. Umesh. Maybe he can tell us that what is their practice and what would he recommend. Because I think there is another listening to it. A lot of people have been following sandwich treatment. So Dr. Umesh, what is your local practice there, and what would you recommend in this context?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. The issue, as Sajal said, was that in stage 3 and the type 2 histology, predominant pattern of relapse is systemic. So a lot of people tend to finalize chemotherapy first in a multidisciplinary meeting. And we have been debating this for many years, even in Tata Hospital, that we should be giving loco-regional radiotherapy as well. But it was always a bargain between loco-regional control versus systemic control. So as Sajal said, for last many years, we have been practicing adjuvant chemo first, 4 cycles of paclitaxel, and followed by the pelvic radiation with or without brachy boost in these patients. But having said that, now POTEC 3 clearly shows that concomitant chemo radiation followed by adjuvant chemo would be a new standard. Having said that, the patterns of practice really has not yet changed across the world for stage 3 or for that matter type 2 histology endometrial cancers. I think it will take some more time for all the oncologists across the world to really shift to POTEC 3, and more so because GOG 258 results are also out. And what has happened is there is big confusion in the community between these two trials. But as Aditi presented, if you see carefully, the selection criteria are different. However, even in GOG 258, they were stage 3 post-op. And if you see both the abstracts or both the full papers together, surprisingly, in POTEC 3, the stage 3 outcome is 70%, whether you give radiation or chemoradiation. Whereas in GOG 258, it is only 58%. So there is a 10% inferior survival in GOG 258, whether you give adjuvant chemoradiation or adjuvant chemo. So there is some discussion which is happening as to why this inferior survival in patients of GOG 258, especially stage 3. For serous histology or the type 2 histology, definitely the abstract which showed that locoregional radiotherapy also is important for serous histology, because the patterns of relapse do suggest that they do have locoregional recurrence. This is very important, provided the surgery for serous histology upfront done is clean. What I mean is the surgery should be in the form of total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, omentectomy, lymph node dissection, peritoneal sampling. Once this is done, then the adjuvant therapy really works in the form of chemo and radiation. But in our country, if you see, the patterns of practice are different. A lot of patients come with simple hysterectomy, and then the histology review shows that it is a serous histology, and then the surgery upfront is suboptimal. So these are the groups which really don't do well, both in terms of locoregional as well as systemic. So in those cases, we tend to give locoregional radiotherapy first, along with chemo, if possible, and then top it up with adjuvant chemo. Having said that, coming back to the two trials comparison, as I said, stage 3, there is a difference. But if you carefully see, the arm which is common to GOG 258 and POTEC 3 is chemoradiation. The protocol is more or less same. In POTEC 3, one arm is radiotherapy alone. In GOG 258, one arm is chemotherapy alone. So in principle, if you combine these two trials, it's a 3-arm trial: radiotherapy alone, concomitant chemoradiation, or adjuvant chemo alone. Let's say these are all high-risk patients. What if you go into details? Can I share the screen and show you one slide?
Yes.
So I think the previous person has to stop the sharing the screen.
Dr. Aditi, maybe.
No. The screen sharing is off. Sir has to start his screen sharing.
It's already on? Okay.
You have to start, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Yeah. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a slide I presented in AGOICON recently. So what I've highlighted here is POTEC 3 and GOG 258. And in the center, you see CTRT, both the arms. What I want to highlight here is shown in the red box. If you give RT alone in these high-risk patients, the systemic relapse chances are 29%. If you give chemoradiation, the systemic relapses become, let's say, 22 to 27%. If you give chemo alone, the systemic relapse is 21. So suffice to say that systemic relapse is more or less similar if you give concomitant chemoradiation or chemotherapy alone. Whereas if you see the vaginal recurrences and pelvic recurrences, they are more or less similar, whether you give RT alone or chemoradiation. But in chemo alone, you land up in 27% of the patients, there is a locoregional relapse. So the bargain actually is between, if you give concomitant chemoradiation, you land up with improvement in local and locoregional relapses by 14%. Whereas with chemotherapy being not given, you're compromising the systemic relapse only by 6%. So this is what I have been discussing with my colleagues here, so that we push concomitant chemoradiation more for these patients in stage 3 as well as the high-risk histology.
Definitely. Okay. So I think what is consistently that we've seen across all these three studies that have been presented is that there is again a re-emphasis on the role of pelvic RT. There was a time when in between we were thinking that probably pelvic RT is going to fade away and there is more role of vaginal brachytherapy in terms of the role of RT. But now what we're seeing is pelvic RT definitely is indicated, whether it is serous carcinomas, and we've seen the modern versus the old. And I think the only difference was the addition of pelvic RT. So I think that would be the take-home message for the residents. So we are back to pelvic RT. Now, I would also want to ask another question to Dr. Robin. Is he there on the panel? Dr. Robin is there? I can't see him. Okay, Dr. Meenakshi, maybe you can answer this. Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Yeah, Meenakshi, I would just want to know that what is the chemo RT protocol that you are following? Because honestly, Dr. Umesh, maybe you can also give your input, Dr. Sajal, you too. And ma'am, Punita ma'am, even, what is your take on that? They are giving only 50 milligram of cisplatin twice in the whole, span of external beam radiation. Now, is that really going to make much of a difference? So what, are we all practicing chemo RT for endometrial cancers? Or there's a few of us who are just giving pelvic EBRT?
No, we are practicing chemo RT in high-risk cases and serous carcinomas. But instead of giving 2 doses of 50 mg per meter square, we are giving weekly dose of cisplatin.
What about the toxicities? Dr. Ramesh, are you giving concurrent chemo RT in endometrial cancers?
No, we have in fact made a phase 2 study which we are looking at the feasibility of giving POTEC 3 protocol in our center now.
Okay, so all of us are not following
because our apprehension, our medical oncologist apprehension is that they wouldn't tolerate, especially in the post-op setting.
Yes, that's our concern as well. Okay, so Dr. Sajal, maybe they in the trial where they have talked about regional control for upfront radiation in endometrial cancers. Now, interestingly, they've used extended field radiation, if you see, for pelvic lymph node involvement. Now, should that be practiced? What would be your comment in terms of that?
Talking about radical radiotherapy when the surgery is not an option?
Yes, when the surgery is not an option, or if you have a locally advanced disease which is not amenable to surgery, you want to give radiation upfront and then subject the patient to surgery.
See, if we have a clinically node negative, then probably I am not going to treat the extended field radiotherapy.
I would just want to know whether it's in practice. In a nodal, if there's a clinically nodal positive disease, is there a practice of extending the fields like we are now doing, not doing, but recommended in the EMBRACE trial? Is anybody following that as of now?
The prophylactic para-aortic radiotherapy, I'm not practicing as such, unless and until we have a high, like a common iliac node or a lower para-aortic node positive, then maybe we can extend it above the nodal area of involvement. But totally treating para-aortic chain till D11, D12 level, prophylactically, I'm not practicing that.
Okay, so I think we are running short of time. I would now move on simultaneously, with this discussion to the role of IMRT in pelvic radiation, whether it's endometrium or cervical cancer. Talking about the NRG trial, now what we've seen is that there is now level 1 evidence to support that the toxicities are reduced, but that is transiently. I think diarrhea is reduced. The maximum difference is at 1 year and then it subsides at 3 years. So, Dr. Umesh, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I'm a bit surprised at the long-term results of this RTOG 1203 because it says that there is no big difference between IMRT and box field post-op radiation. However, they have shown that in acute toxicities are less, obviously because high-dose regions to the bowels can be spared.
Yeah.
On similar lines, I'm sure you all are aware that Supriya has also presented the TMH trial in Astro a couple of years back.
Yeah.
And I will not reveal the final results because that is going to be presented in this year's Astro, and I'm not sure, I will not be able to share the results, but you'll have a big surprise from that as well.
Okay. So as of now, see, because whatever we are discussing, I think it is going to be important for the practicing young oncologists and of course our residents also. So as of now, we do not recommend moving drastically to IMRT. As of today, even though we have evidence.
No, but looking at the acute toxicities and the bowel sparing effects which have been shown in these early outcomes of RTOG as well as PARSEF, it seems that there is definitely a role of IMRT in the post-op setting. Mm-hmm. Having said that, let's say it may not be applicable across for all patients. Maybe in patients who had some small bowel complications during surgery, or patients have multiple pelvic surgeries, or patients have some small bowel intolerance, maybe those selected group of patients might benefit from sparing the bowel technique by IMRT.
Okay. So now we'll be moving on to, now that we've discussed the role of IMRT, EBRT, and I think we'll move on the discussion to vaginal toxicity. Now, coming to vaginal toxicity and sexual outcomes, I think this is really an unaddressed issue. And this is definitely now a new OAR to be reported, and we have to address this issue. So I can see Dr. Robin there on the panel. Dr. Robin, what would your comment be? Yes, hello. What would your take be on this study? Now that we have increased information in terms of vaginal points, now we are trying to correlate vaginal toxicity with the dose. And of course, it has an outcome on the sexual outcomes. And I think this is quite an unaddressed issue. So would you like to comment on that?
Look, in practice, it's not uncommon to see patients who come on follow-up and report symptoms of dyspareunia and often on bleeding because of pain. And when we examine these patients, we do encounter there is an signs of telangiectasia in the vagina, and sometimes fibrosis, the whitish picture coming. So the fibrosis and the tightening can be visible in these patients. So that obviously is a patient, though most of our patients, as in Indian practice would be, and also this study showed around 41% of the patient did not have sexual activity post their cancer treatments. And this is the same which we also see. The majority of the patients actually are not having sexual intercourse. So we may have to ask them to use dilators to maintain them, because the examinations also become difficult in these patients. The synecdoche and all sorts of problems do happen.
Yes, because there's also some evidence which suggests that perhaps the dilators really may not be of much help. Dr. Meenakshi, hello, Dr. Meenakshi.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, Bhavna.
Yes, Dr. Meenakshi, in your clinical practice, how important do you feel as a practitioner and as a lady to address these issues? Because I think a lot of our patients are quite inhibited. And again, coming back to the role of patient-reported outcomes that we've seen, in the ENERGIC trial, I think it is extremely important, that we address these issues and we ask the patients to report these problems.
Yeah, I certainly feel this is an unaddressed situation. And most of the patients, female patients, being a lady doctor, they come and tell us about these problems, having dyspareunia. And the results which are showing that the 48% of patients, they don't have any sexual activity or little sexual activity. It's maybe because of the dyspareunia or the difficulty in having that. So what I feel is this is a major concern which has to be addressed. And whatever treatment we are giving nowadays, like maybe the local creams, moisturizers or dilators, they are not much help.
Excuse me. Hello.
Yeah.
Dr. Bhavna?
Yes. Do we have to wind up? Hello?
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 Hello. Yes, can you hear me? How many of us are reporting vaginal points?
Ma'am, can we conclude the session, please?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Bhavna, I would just like to add that we require some more efforts to be done in this. I have gynecologist colleagues who say that some laser therapies of radiation to pelvis might help these patients. I don't know what's the experience as TMH. Maybe Dr. Umesh will be able to say about the fibrosis and synechia of vagina, the post radiation treatment with laser therapy.
So my comment, there are two comments on this. One is there's a practice in the community that you have to address this issue only when they get this toxicity. I think it is more important that prevention is better than cure. So whoever sees the patient at first follow-up, you should insist on reviewing the patient by an occupational therapist. Start the vaginal dilatation exercises ASAP once the acute vaginal toxicities come down. And there is also a lot of thinking in the community that if the lady is sexually active, she need not go for vaginal dilatation. That's a wrong concept. And I must admit that sexual activity is a pleasure and not an exercise. So you should advise these women, especially young women, to go for vaginal dilatation early. At the same time, they also can have the regular sexual activity which they would go for. And as somebody said that 50% were not sexually active, that number will be very, very high in India. But having said that, we need to push this more into the community so that these women will have a better quality of life in terms of vaginal toxicities.
I think we've been asked to conclude the session. Dr. Punita, ma'am, maybe just conclude it now? Hello? Okay, thank you. I think we'll stop here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.